All right, so as I've mentioned, we have two speakers today. The first speaker we will hear from is Carter Charles, who is a visiting assistant professor of French and Francophone studies here at BYU. He is a proud natif natal of Haiti, right, the first black republic, who carries a French passport, but of course is also teaching here in the United States. He's completed education in Haiti, in French Guiana, and in Bordeaux, France, where he earned his PhD with a dissertation entitled The Political Integration of Mormons in the United States, from Reed Smoot to Mitt Romney. And he's authored several articles, book chapters, and reviews, and a book ambitiously titled Tout savoir sur la religion mormone, right? All you need to know about Mormonism. So he's the guy to ask. Right, that was in 2018, and today he's going to be talking, right, to us about many of these same subjects. So we'll turn the time over to Carter Charles. Please join me in welcoming him to the Kennedy Center.
It's great to share the panel with Clayton. There is no surprise for you learning that the 1789 French Revolution took the church by surprise, since it's already showing. Tell that I didn't do a good job preparing myself. I am also very appreciative of the interest of the Kennedy Center in my work on Latter-day Saints in secular France, and also for its support. Much of what I will be presenting is work in progress than anything conclusive. It's impossible, in fact, to come to definitive conclusions on a project that studies itineraries and trajectories, except to say that, obviously they change over time, people change, and so forth. I thank you for being here to listen to Clayton and I also acknowledge my colleague and friend, Pierre Vandessy. He is not physically here. He is in Bordeaux, France. He is a sociologist and affiliate of the Center Émile Durkheim. He is a co-investigator with me on the project. So it fell upon me to delineate the historical and cultural space within which one must approach the question of religion in France. Not an easy task. Just last week, an agnostic friend in France almost shared his condolences when I told him that I was teaching separation of church and state in France. How do you explain to foreigners what most French people, even educated French, don't understand? It's too late to pass on the task to someone else, so I venture. Separation of church and state in France took the church by surprise. The Vatican did not expect that dissatisfaction with monarchic Ancien Regime would swell to the point of eroding the church's ties to its eldest daughter, as France is generally referred to. Hence, separation was brutal. And I will illustrate that in a series of facts. Fact number one is that the revolution began a process of decoupling the church from the state. The clergy is no longer one of the three socio-political orders. It must operate under a civil, this worldly constitution. Now let's see if this works. It doesn't like me. This also takes me by surprise. So it must operate under this worldly. There! Hit it a couple of times and it works. So this worldly constitution called Constitution Civile du Clergé, Civil Constitution of the Clergy, makes the Vatican, the Pope, and therefore the Church. By the way, when I say the Church, I mean the Church. In sociology of religion, when we say the Church, we mean the Catholic Church. In Utah, obviously, we mean the Latter-day Saint, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I will come to that point later. So it makes the church a foreign power and therefore a foe to the state. Article 4, for instance, in that constitution illustrates a Gallican move, that is a move to a Francization of the church, to make it a church of France. France, in that context, remain a very religious nation, but the Vatican and the Catholic Church, religion is somewhat foreign, and the Pope, the visible head of the church, is kept at bay. Church dignitaries have no authority unless approved by the state. And you can see this, whoops, going too far. You can see this here. I'm not going to read the quotes. I'll just leave them for you to read. So the 1789 revolution, therefore, introduces a dynamic of secularization which continues, for instance, immediately in the month of August. That same year, in Act 2, the National Assembly drafted and passed the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, in which the Assembly places itself in the presence and under the auspices of the Supreme Being. Supreme Being is an inclusive way to refer to deity. It also implies that the country was no longer under a Christian God. One illustration of the declaration, which you are seeing here, actually shows that God validates the pitting of secular law above divine one in the presence of the angel pointing to the new Decalogue, the new law that was to be the law of the land, including for all believers. Article 10 of the Declaration further erodes the monopoly of the church in that it introduces and protects religious freedom. No one shall be troubled for their opinions, even religious one, but it also circumscribes practice, provided their manifestation does not disturb public order established by law. I'm going too fast. Forgetting there. Act 3. Pope Pius VII and Bonaparte signed a concordat in 1801. By definition, a concordat is an agreement. The two parties sit down and they determine that, okay, we're going to do this. You will see that Napoleon sometimes has his particular understanding of what a concordat is. So 1801 is a concordat in which they agreed indeed that the church would operate in certain ways in France. From the perspective of pro-church and state relations, this concordat was actually a restoring of the church. In fact, it shows church authorities at the same level, standing and even numerically superior to state authorities, as you can see in this illustration here. They are in good spirits. One of them is even looking up heavenward to see the clouds of darkness dispelling as the Virgin Mary returns to illuminate the French world. The pro-separation side, however, shows the church numerically inferior and its plenipotentiary envoy looking down, suggesting submission. Indeed, the reality is that although Napoleon may have been bad at bargaining with Thomas Jefferson for Louisiana, with the church, he was shrewd and ruthless. He actually played the Pope in the 1801 Concordat because it allowed him to strengthen the grip of the state over the church and further established a Gallican French church, in which the clergy is bound by oath to act as intelligence agents for the state. Two cases in point, which I will leave for you to read. I'll just mention in passing that when this article indicates that the Catholic religion is the religion of the vast majority of the French people, it implies that it is no longer the religion of the state. Other shocking points here is that there is a shared management of the church. My students there are surprised when I tell them, think about the situation where there is a Latter-day Saint temple in Paris. You have President Macron designating the Latter-day Saint who is the temple president, and President Nelson here is bound to confer him the keys to manage and handle the temple. That's the kind of situation in which the Catholic Church found itself in this 1801 Concordat. Worse yet is this article here in which the clergy is to swear an oath of allegiance on the Gospels to the state. Not satisfied with the 1801 Concordat, Napoleon unilaterally promulgated an 1801 document referred to as a Concordat, but it's actually also referred to as organic articles. 77 of them regulate the Catholic Church, 44 the Protestant churches. The Pope this time refused to sign. Napoleon jailed him, as you can see here. And there is war and so forth. Napoleon even anticipated transferring the Holy See from Rome to Paris or Avignon. In Act of 3, moving very quickly, there is between 1802 and 1905 growing demands for separation. Anti-clericalism is increasing in the country. And the more effort the church puts to strengthen its ties with the state, the more anti-clericalism, leading, for instance, to this kind of illustration that is referred to as, French leaders, key figures actually of separation of church and state, depicting as bouffeurs de curé, that is, eating and being harsh on religious leaders. So, in spite of that depiction, the 1905 separation law is a really good one. It shies away from brutal separation, axe separation that some were calling for, to enact something that is more conciliatory, although slightly anti-clerical. If you understand the context, you will understand why this depiction is anti-clerical, but no time to comment on this here. So the law provides for a good, a balanced way, healthy way for believers and non-believers to cohabit, to occupy the space. But to this day, despite the constitutional clause that France is an indivisible republic, separation of church and state is a tale of two countries, even of a multiplicity of countries under the same sovereignty. Indeed, different laws govern different church-state relations in different parts of the country. In Alsace-Moselle, for instance, those relations are regulated by the 1802 document that Napoleon couldn't get the Pope to sign. In this document, there are four statutory religions: the Catholic Church, the Protestant churches, Lutheran and Reformed, and also the Israelite religion, Judaism. Non-statutory religion can actually register and receive funding from the local authorities, although not from the state itself. In Guadeloupe, Martinique, Réunion, Saint Barth, Saint Martin, where people like to vacation, religion is regulated by the 1911 laws that transpose the 1905 law into colonial territories, meaning there are slight differences. French Guiana, where I lived, is under the 1828 royal decree, not even the 1905 law. A decree, well, in some cases under the 1905 law, but that's very complicated to get into. This decree stipulates that local authorities ought to fund the Catholic Church, specifically that church, and it was confirmed in 2017 by the equivalent of the U.S. Supreme Court. And there are laws in Mayotte, New Caledonia, French Polynesia, and so forth. Still, the law, the 1905 law is one of balance and pacification because it avoided enacting anti-clerical calls to outlaw religion and Christianity altogether. Paradoxically, what most French people retain is not the equilibrium of the 1905 law. What prevails in French society is a spirit of bouffeurs de curé, anti-clericalism, the right to blaspheme, and a sense that religion is a species foreign to true French life, hence to be rooted out or driven away. Clayton will illustrate that in the case of the Muslims, and I will illustrate a little bit in the case of Latter-day Saints. Although I have to say that Muslims and Latter-day Saints are treated in ways that are very different, in part because with the sense that religion is foreign, most of Muslim adherents in France are themselves immigrants. So there is immigration that also factors into how these two religious groups are treated. So for Latter-day Saints, for instance, on April 9th, 2018, a group of excited youth and their tired chauffeurs, me included, pulled in on Boulevard Saint-Antoine in Chennai, near Versailles, where the temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is located. Their 5-hour drive, actually a little bit more than that, from the border region, was finally coming to its happy end, the temple grounds. Once the sacred edifice was fully in sight, our eyes were not met first with the house of the Lord, holiness to the Lord, but with sacrilege. Someone had tagged one of the outer walls of the temple in the night between Sunday and Monday. Adding ignorance to sacrilege, the tag read, "Yankees Go Home." The next day, while taking a walk in the beautiful gardens of the temple, a good Catholic who has an apartment overlooking the gardens with its beautiful Thorvalds and Christus, came to me and expressed regrets that the edifice, which he obviously cared about, had been vandalized. The Yankees Go Home tag on the temple is indicative of at least two aspects to take into account to understand the sometimes delicate situation the Latter-day Saints experience is to be understood in France. First, that the temple was erected is evidence that from a legal standpoint, nothing opposes a Latter-day Saint presence and worship in France. The 1905 law actually makes that possible. From a cultural standpoint, however, Yankees Go Home echoes fears of 1789 that I have mentioned in later years that any religion was foreign and a threat to national integrity. Shortly after the local government authorized the construction of the temple, Martial Prado, a local resident and opponent of the project, declared, among other things, to national media, quote, "Unlike a church, a temple is the starting point of an expansion." He goes on to refer to Salt Lake City, where 90% of the population is Mormon, according to him, because of the American temple. It's just one temple in the and he concludes that because of that, there is really a risk that the Shanesian population, where the temple is located, will become Mormons. Another resident stated that the temple will generate an increase in the number of Mormons who will invade the city. To the question posed by a journalist, "Do you know the Mormons?" the man's response was, "No, I don't want to know them anyway." But this is the essence of the research question that Pierre and I are working on. What are the Latter-day Saints? Who are the Latter-day Saints who live in France? How do they embody and live their religion in a country that is both historically very religious and deeply secular? How do they situate in the socio-political landscape and on issues? What do they think about the American origins of their religion? Are they that much similar to their fellow believers in the United States? A general answer is that there is a paradoxical but essential coexistence of unity and diversity among Latter-day Saints in France, because that unity is made of individuals whose sociological profiles as well as religious goals are extremely diverse. Because of that, individual trajectories are never predictable nor irreversible. Christian Ovrard, a well-known Latter-day Saint, established what we call a macro profile of Latter-day Saints in his 2008 dissertation. In scope and space, his work is very different and at the same time very similar to what we are doing. In his case, he has a survey of 1,431 Latter-day Saints in 99 out of 110 units in the country. So very broad. At the same time, our work differs from his in that we intend to survey no more than 50 people. The difference, however, lies in the fact that, unlike him, we do not send a written questionnaire that people sit down and answer. We actually go and meet with people and ask them questions, including follow-up questions on things that matter to them, because we want to come up with a micro view of what their experience is like in France. So I'll share some of the similarities very quickly in the 1 minute that I have, and hopefully more in the Q&A. General demographics as of 2021, the numbers can be found on the Church of Jesus, the website of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Roughly, there are about 29,000 Latter-day Saints in French Polynesia alone. That's the second largest body of Latter-day Saints, French Latter-day Saints, and then 38,200 in mainland France. About 10% Christians were found in 2008 of these people were foreigners, and out of that, about 4.2% hailed from North Africa. Within that number, 28.2% had a foreign background. Now, depending on where you are in France, if you are in the Paris LDS area, you will see more of that demographic diversity, although Christian Avrar regrets that diversity does not show in the leadership of the church. I did see it in Bordeaux when I moved there. My bishop was actually a man born and raised in Guadeloupe. He still lives there, and his wife hails from Madagascar. Some other trends have emerged. French people have 3 or 4 generations of their families in the church. The above explain a growing number of endogamic marriages, but not as in Utah. Hence, sometimes people leaving the church to find a partner. Most Latter-day Saints, over 90% in fact in France, are fully involved in the political life of the country. Politically, you will find about 52% on the right and 48% on the left. That speaks to more diversity than we actually see in Utah and the United States. Most of those in the border region are homeowners, and in fact, they have children who are themselves homeowners. The above means that a majority of them are middle class, moving into middle class socioeconomic category, and a lot of them actually work in education, especially women, for reasons that we will elaborate on during the Q&A. I think my time is up at this point. I don't want to overdo it and leave time for Clayton and Q&A. Thank you very much for your attention and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Carter, we will now hear from Clayton Van Woerkom, who's a graduate student earning a master's in social anthropology at BYU, and he is also a graduate of our Middle East Studies Arabic program, so he's a Kennedy Center alum. We're happy about that. And this semester, he is a Kennedy Center Student Research Fellow. And his research interests are very broad, interested in language, religion, personhood, many good things. And you can see he's going to talk to us today about becoming good Muslims, pious Republican personhood in small-town France. So, Clayton.
So first off, I just have to thank Charles for doing all the heavy lifting, introducing the context. He really took one for the team there. So my presentation today is based on ethnographic fieldwork that I conducted between May and August of this year in this small town called Gien in central France. So in my presentation today, I'll explore how many non-Muslims in Gien perceive Islam to be at odds with Frenchness. Specifically, I'll examine non-Muslim discourses, which essentially posit that French republicanism makes good people while Islam makes bad people, and that it is impossible to be both pious Muslim and Republican French. I'll then address how my Muslim interlocutors in Gien react in potentially surprising ways as they prioritize efforts to become good persons. So I want to start by contextualizing the space in which my research took place. Gien is a small town located about an hour and a half south of Paris along the Loire River. And according to 2019 records, Gien has a population of about 13,000 people. While Gien is known as a bourgeois city, many of its inhabitants are employed in manual work at the nearby nuclear power plants, as well as in an elevator factory, a perfume factory, several pharmaceutical and chemical plants, a meatpacking business, and a car parts factory. And others work in a variety of service jobs, including restaurants, medicine, and in clothing stores. There are two mosques in Gien. One is a state-funded Turkish mosque, attended almost exclusively by Turks and Kurds, where the sermons are conducted in Turkish. At the other mosque, called the Grand Mosque of Gien, sermons are given in both French and Standard Arabic. Attendees come from a variety of ethnic backgrounds. The majority are Moroccan immigrants and their descendants, overwhelmingly from the Rif region in northern Morocco. But there are also Turks, Algerians, Tunisians, Senegalese, Malians, Lebanese, Somalians, Syrians, white Europeans, and others that attend the Grand Mosque. My Muslim interlocutors in Gien, as Dr. Charles pointed out, live in a country with a rich and complicated history of engagement with religion and with Islam. Muslims have been in France in small numbers since the early days of their religion, but Muslim population began to increase in earnest when France colonized lands in North and West Africa beginning in the 1800s. Signs of the long-standing relationship between France and Islam can be seen in varying degrees of prominence across France, from the Grand Mosque of Paris, built with state funding in 1926, to Islamic graves of Algerian and Malagasy soldiers who died in Gien while fighting for France in World War II. Despite this long history, the overwhelming majority of the Muslim community in France and in Gien issued primarily from labor migration in the 1970s and 80s, and has continued to grow through migration for labor, for education, and for family reunification, as well as high birth rates. Along with this migration have come well-documented tensions between France and its Muslims. Some examples of major controversies related to Islam include the following. In 1989, several schoolgirls were suspended for refusing to remove their hijabs. This led to a heated and ongoing debate about the acceptability of Islamic dress in schools and in public spaces more generally. This debate contributed to a 2004 national ban on ostentatious religious symbols like the hijab in public schools. In 2016, another controversy arose around women's Islamic dress when state courts upheld bans on modest swimwear, colloquially called burkinis. In the popular and scholarly discourse, many of these tensions around Islam have been understood as stemming from Islam's perceived conflict with the French conception of secularism, laïcité, which Dr. Charles spoke to us about. Tensions with Islam have heightened further with an increase in Islamic State-affiliated terrorism in France, and for many, these tensions with Islam also involve associating Islam with urban decay, delinquency, crime, and rioting in les banlieues, the poor suburbs of France's largest cities. And French society and the French state have reacted in various ways to these tensions. The most discussed response has been the various restrictions on Islamic dress, including a nationwide ban on full veiling. But the tensions around Islam have also contributed to an increase in anti-immigrant political rhetoric and the surging popularity of the French far right. Moreover, the French state heavily monitors Muslims and has imposed financial restrictions on many Muslim associations, in addition to closing a number of mosques and weaponizing deportation against religious leaders of foreign nationality that it deems threatening. And such negative conceptions, which view Islam as a disvalue, as something that keeps someone from being a good person, are very present in Gien. I conducted my fieldwork during the legislative elections, in which Gien narrowly elected a representative to the National Assembly from the far-right National Rally Party. I observed a deep discomfort with Islam as I talked with political candidates and their advocates from across the political spectrum. While right-wing parties were usually more explicit in their criticism of Islam, I observed a suspicion of Islam on the political left as well. For example, a campaigner for the Workers' Struggle, a communist party, told me that her problem with Islam was that it tended to divide the working class, telling me a personal story from a factory floor where a Muslim woman had refused to remove her hijab to the chagrin of her fellow line workers. When I asked campaigners for the mainstream left-wing party, which coincidentally most of the politically active Muslims in Guyane and France vote for, I asked them what they thought of Islam. Their response was to talk to me about their preoccupations with threats to France posed by Islamism and Salafism, which are commonly equated with Islamic extremism and violence. Every Saturday in Guyane, there's a large open-air market where you can buy just about anything, from fresh produce to housewares. This market is a particularly interesting site to observe the relations between Muslims and non-Muslims in Guyane, as nearly everyone in town, from all walks of life, comes to buy or sell. I say nearly everyone because several people told me, they have friends who refused to come because the market had become an Arab market. And the market was dominated by Moroccan, Algerian, and Turkish sellers, especially in the non-food stalls. And some of these sellers sold explicitly Islamic products like prayer rugs, rosary beads, hijabs, and incense, alongside other products like cookware, clothing, and fashion accessories. There was a halal butcher stand at the market, as well as an Islamic bookseller and a stall selling Moroccan pastries, which attracted an almost exclusively Muslim clientele. I spent a good deal of time with the Islamic bookseller, chatting with him and observing his interactions with customers. But one of the most interesting aspects of these observations was the way I saw some of the non-Muslim passers-by interacting with this explicitly Islamic business. I observed a fair amount of particular French gestures, including le boeuf, which looks like this, so. The la mu, so. These expressions are generally used to communicate I don't know, or discontentment, disagreement, doubt, or some other negative feeling. One time, a white French couple was browsing from shop to shop, examining the wares at the various stalls, when they eventually came to the book stand. After glancing over the products, the man quietly exclaimed to the woman, "Ah ouais," which in this context probably meant something akin to the English "oh," indicating surprise. They were standing next to a table with children's books. I heard the woman say, "Oh, they're for kids. It's good that at least they're in French." And this phrasing would seem to indicate that while the woman did not really approve of Islam being taught to children, she was at least pleased and perhaps surprised that the instruction would be occurring in French. Her phrasing not only points to the perceived goodness of French, it also points to a common conception that Muslim immigrants are linguistically challenged, either because they speak other languages at home or because of the importance of Arabic in Islamic practice and pedagogy. As the couple began to move away, they were joined by a teenage girl, presumably their daughter. After glancing over the stand, the girl exclaimed rather loudly, "But isn't that prohibited?" And the parents responded in hushed tones, and they all shuffled away. At the heart of the conflict, as I see it, for many in France, the state and its Republican values ought to be the universal moral authority, the main and, in most cases, the only force working to create moral persons. Those that hold this view see Islam as a problem, not only because they perceive it as antithetical to their own moral values, but also because they see Islam as competing with state republicanism for supremacy in producing good persons. Such nervousness around Muslims is not universal among Guyane's non-Muslim population. The current mayor, for example, maintains a good relationship and an open dialogue with the Muslim community, and there are several members of Guyane's Catholic parish that have initiated informal interfaith nights, which take place a few times a year at the mosque. Nonetheless, there's a fair amount of pushback and discomfort around these sorts of outreach efforts, as the story of the Islamist collusion from the previous example demonstrates. And even the liaison between the Catholic and Muslim communities told me that she had received significant pushback from members of the parish when she started the interfaith nights. This is all to say that that my Muslim friends in Guyane carry out their lives in a context that generally disvalues Islam and propagates a discourse which portrays Islamic piety as antithetical to goodness. Much of the existing scholarship on Islam in France foregrounds discussions of this sort of prejudice. It emphasizes how French Muslims are oppressed and how activists, public intellectuals, and Islamic scholars challenge and combat these marginalizing narratives. The scholarship on Islam in France tends to assume that power is the primary factor at play in the lives of French Muslims, essentially asserting that resisting oppression is their primary value. This is not what I observed in Jian. Rather, I observed that the primary value of my Muslim interlocutors is Islamic piety, and that becoming good persons, rather than resisting oppression, is the main priority in their lives. In other words, my interlocutors pursue a good life by becoming good Muslims. Certainly, part of their pursuit of goodness involves valuing Republican Frenchness and questioning oppressive discourses, but their central objective remains being good. In the Muslim community in Jian, as in many religious communities, efforts to become a good person are nearly constant and are too many and varied for adequate discussion in this short presentation. So to conclude, I want to explain a little bit about how I began to realize that being good was a far more important consideration for my Muslim friends than was power and resistance. I hope this will give you a sense of what my interlocutors truly value and how they pursue the good life in a context that seems so oppressive. Following the approach I had seen in other scholarship on Islam in France, when I first came to Jian, I asked a lot of questions about oppression and resistance. People certainly had things to say. As I hope you all can tell, the oppression of French Muslims is very real. But when I asked these questions, I often felt like I was distracting people from what they really wanted to tell me. Here's a short story that illustrates this. One evening, my wife and I were eating dinner with a large extended family in the home of the grandparents. As we ate, we chatted with the middle-aged couple across from us. When they told us about their jobs, I asked if they ever experienced discrimination because of their race or religion. Yes, they said. They told us that while they'd luckily never experienced any explicit harassment, there were lots of little situations where they could tell that they were perceived and treated differently. After saying this, the woman quickly added, "But we're not into victimization." She told me how they tried to focus on the more important things in life rather than complaining about every little thing that went wrong. She then asked us a lot of questions about the United States. She was particularly interested in asking me about a Muslim American scholar who she followed on YouTube and Instagram. As I was familiar with this scholar, we ended up having a pretty extensive conversation about him. She told me about how much she appreciated his perspectives on Islam, which she said helped her to focus on her inward spirituality. She said it was important to her to be changed by her religious practice instead of engaging in blind performance, which she said she had struggled with in the past. She said that she wished more Muslims in France would turn their focus to their inward being instead of remaining fixated on outward conduct. In this example, my interlocutor was clearly deeply invested in understanding what it means to be a good Muslim, in pursuing that kind of pious life and encouraging others to do the same. Significantly, she was more interested in discussing questions of piety than questions of power. As I continued my research, I found this was almost always the case. Muslims in Jian were preeminently concerned with becoming good. They usually only mentioned oppression when I asked about it or when they first met me. However, what my interlocutors cared about most, what they spent the most time thinking about and talking about and doing, was becoming good Muslims. So where does this leave us in relation to the oppression obviously faced by French Muslims? Well, despite the stigmatized status of Islam in France, I observed frequent discussions where my interlocutors would indicate that being better Muslims may actually be a part of the solution to the complicated situation of their community. They said that part of the issue with Islam's bad reputation in France is that people are not good enough Muslims. They said that the problems often associated with Islam, such as terrorism, drug trafficking, and urban unrest, are actually the result of people's impiety. In other words, people engaging in such things are not proper Muslims. My interlocutors hope that by increasing their piety, by becoming whole Muslim persons who focus on spiritual matters, who are at peace with God, themselves, and others, that non-Muslims in France, with whom they come in contact in their daily lives, will see their goodness and come to accept Islam as the force for good that my interlocutors believe it is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Two really engaging presentations. We have a few minutes, about 15 minutes for Q&A. And what we'll do, we know some of you may have to leave to go to class. That's fine. We'll allow you to do that, especially just try to do it as unobtrusively as you can. What we'll do is we'll now open the floor for questions. Laura at the back has a microphone. So please just, what we'll do is we'll raise your hand She'll come, I'll call on you. She'll bring you the microphone. Please tell us who you are, if you're a student, what you're studying, and let our speakers know a little about you, and then ask your question. And do let us know which speaker you are addressing your question to, and then we'll have them respond in turn. So, please, looks like over here with Austin.
Hi, this question is for Clayton. So you said that piety is a really big deal for the Muslims, that they're concerned with being good, which is, to me, a thin sort of general moral descriptor. I was wondering if you could offer insight on any thicker or more specific moral descriptors. Is it charity that they're pursuing? Is it a plurality of the values or attributes? If you could say what's at the top of the list, offer any insight on that.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that's actually the main question that I'm trying to answer in my my broader project. The reason I use piety is because I think it's generalizable across a varied community that has lots of different opinions on what it means to be good. One should be good, and that Islam is a good way to become good, but exactly how one might go about doing that is up for debate. So, I mean, yeah, so many examples. I mean, like, certainly, ritual practice and proper ritual practice is a big deal, and attaining more knowledge is pretty significant in this community. So, and this is, I think, fairly common in France. So, because the Muslim population is issued from labor migration, there aren't a lot of like educated Islamic scholars or anything in France. So, developing an infrastructure for attaining knowledge and increasing one's knowledge of Islam and the community's knowledge of Islam is a really big deal, including in Jian. So, for example, right now, they're building an addition to the mosque so that they can have a big library and additional classrooms. So this is about increasing communal knowledge, communal piety through knowledge. But I mean, there's just so many things. So, like, for example, I was helping build this addition to the mosque one day, and we were putting cement inside the walls. And everyone was super concerned with not wasting any cement, to a degree that was pretty surprising to me. And this was towards the beginning of my trip that this happened. And then as I went on, people were constantly talking about like how you shouldn't waste. And like in the sort of eating area of the mosque in the basement, there's this big sign that says, "Those that waste are the brothers of devils." Right, so like there's this sort of moral principle to avoid waste that people talk about, but then it shows up in these really mundane situations like pouring cement. So what it means to be pious is a big question, one that I can't describe fully, certainly not here. So I'll just leave it there. That was already too long.
Yeah, please.
My name is Will Anderson. I'm a social studies education major here. And so my question, Dr. Charles, is about education. You mentioned right at the end there that there is a lot of LDS members in France who work in education. I was just curious what the connection was there.
Latter-day Saints, thank you for the question. Latter-day Saints are encouraged to grow families, to raise families, and even now, the general recommendation is that mothers should raise their children. This is one of the things that they take, the people I have interviewed and that I know take very seriously. And at the same time, they try to balance that with the French culture. That is, it's not very common also for women to stay constantly at home. Education is a way for them to not only to get an education, but actually to teach. A lot of the women that we have interviewed that we know, either before or after or during actually motherhood, they work in the area of education. How does that work? Well, because for instance, Wednesday, if you work in primary education, elementary education, Wednesdays are actually free days. You don't go to teach, it's off, you prepare or you manage your time from home. That's one thing. The other is that there is a lot of vacation in the educational system in France. Every 5 weeks, you have 2 weeks off. And then summer begins in July. School doesn't start again until September. Okay, so there is a lot of free time for family. And that's why we find a lot of them going in that direction. Does that answer the question?
So, Jacob Hickman, anthropology. I have a question for both of you, actually. Having these two talks juxtaposed against each other, I guess I'm just wondering, when you each look at each other's, account of what laïcité means for each other's group, what sort of differences emerge in how the concept of laïcité sort of works in a broader French imagination? And just as one sort of maybe other third point of comparison, some work that I've done with Hmong communities in France, it's interesting, there's a positive discourse about valuing Hmong culture as non-threatening that a lot of the French in this rural community would explicitly juxtapose against, why can't the Arabs be more like these Hmong people, right? And they were passing off Hmong weddings and funerals not as religion but as culture. So I guess I'm just wondering, as you sort of think about each other's projects, what sort of comparative insights might we get about how laïcité is mobilized in different ways for different religious communities?
That's a really hard question, Jacob. Jacob is my thesis advisor, so he make life hard. Yeah, I think I would say so. Yeah, yeah. So, I think so. I didn't talk about this a ton in my presentation, but one of the ways I'm trying to think about what's going on in France is in terms of hierarchies of values. And I would say that maybe this is a hierarchy of disvalues, where generally religion is bad, right? And part of the reason I think why Hmong people practicing ritual sacrifice and stuff is okay with these French people is because it's culture and not religion, right? And this is kind of what one of my interlocutors said, as long as, I didn't say this in my presentation, but this guy said, as long as religion is just cultural and it's not, you don't actually believe it, then it's cool. Yeah, I would say in terms of hierarchies of disvalue, Islam is at the bottom in France. The point of laïcité, as I see it, in the contemporary discourse on laïcité has a lot to do with French people's discomfort with Islam and with Arabs and with immigration, and it's being weaponized against them. And there's definitely a general discomfort, as Dr. Charles pointed out, with religion, right, wanting to eat the priest. But I think Mormonism is smaller, so it's less of a threat, right? It's not at the forefront of cultural change in France, whereas Islam is. And what I think is interesting and what's telling about this, and maybe Dr. Charles can talk about this a little bit more, but there's a pretty robust discourse questioning contemporary conceptions of laïcité in Islam in France and in Catholicism in France, especially in fundamentalist Catholicism, that I haven't really seen nearly as much in Mormonism in France. There's people definitely question it, but there's not as much overt discourse, public discourse about it, and I think that definitely has something to do with the size of the communities. Yeah, and also I know a lot of French Mormons who really don't like Muslims, and there's that. I don't know.
saints surveyed in leading to Christianity for All's dissertation in 2008 believe that Islam is incompatible with the French Republic. 78% of these people, it was during the debates as to whether Turkey should be part of the European Union, believe that Turkey does not belong in the European Union, in that they are very similar to their French compatriots. At the same time, I would add that while Mormonism, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is viewed as foreign like all other religion, Islam is more foreign in France and in Europe than the Latter-day Saints, in part because Islam, like Christianity, is a religion of conquest. One of the things that we did not talk about is that Islam did try to conquer France all the way to Tours, not far from where you conducted your research. That is also a story to keep in mind when trying to understand. And then the other thing is that one of the disciples of Émile Durkheim, actually his nephew, Marshall Gaucher, Mauss, said that religion is a total social fact. Islam, the idea of piety is that in Islam, if you have people trying to live religion up to what it is, as a total social fact, as something that encompasses everything in your life, you display something that is offending to most French people because their history has always been to push religion to the margins or to actually have the state control religion. I think this factors into these things. The Hmong did not try to invade and conquer France, for instance. I would just add that.
Okay, we probably have time for one more question, if we have one more. Leslie.
How have people of African descent been treated differently in either communities, or is there any divide? By French or within among? My main question is by the French. Is there a different view? Or you can, maybe if you know something about within the community, that would be fine too.
There is intersectional issues here. First, they are of African ancestry, and there is problems with integration of these people in France, even actually among, after Aimé Césaire, among Guadeloupeans and Martinicans. They do not want to be referred to as something African. They are French, they are West Indians, and so if you are from North Africa and you are a Muslim, then it complicates things, yes. But again, I wonder what part of that has to do with the history of colonialism and what part has to do with the Muslim faith being seen as inherently a problem in the country. In either case, it's not fun for some African background and Black Africans actually in France in some cases. Yeah, I don't know. I'll just stand here.
This is a question that this wasn't my main research question, but I was interested to see how this played out in the Muslim community in Jian, like where there's a mix of pretty much everyone is African, but there's North African Arabs and then Black Africans. And part of the reason I was interested in this is because when I've spent time in Morocco, I've seen pretty overt discrimination against Black Africans by Moroccan Muslims, which I didn't see at all in Jian. I think it's quite possible that there are prejudices, but at least in the mosque, everyone was praying together. There were Black Africans in leadership positions in the mosque who led the call to prayer, who gave the sermon, etc. And so I was actually quite surprised to see that after my experiences in Morocco, just since most of the mosque congregants come from our Arab North Africans. I would say also, I think, and this is something that both Arab Muslims and Black Muslims told me, while I was in Jian is that it's easier for black Muslims to pass, as they don't index Islam quite as strongly as Arabs. If you're Arab, you're Muslim and you're bad. And there's definitely anti-black racism in France, but I would say the more predominant form of racism that you're going to see in public discourse is anti-Arab racism. So, yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Really fascinating stuff. Please join me in thanking our presenters one more time.